All right, we're going to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Present are council members Cost, Bub, Blake, Marmee, and Labutus for Frazier. First item on the agenda is a request for legislation, resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Newark to enter into a community development block grant funded sub-recipient agreement with the hereinafter named organizations to carry out activities included within Newark's fiscal year 2018 Community Development Block Grant one-year action plan.
These organizations we fund with our CDBG dollars, and our plan is to fund Behavioral Health Care Partners, St. Vincent de Paul, Coalition of Care, Salvation Army, Newark Development Partners, Denison Garden of Hope, Licking County Coalition of Housing, Canal Market, Together We Grow, and the Woodlands New Beginnings. Now those are the list of nonprofits we plan to fund if they meet all of the requirements of CDBG. And the reason we're asking for it now is we've submitted our one-year plan to HUD. We're waiting on congressional release of funds, so the timing of getting this through so we have it ready when we get our release, which we don't know when that will be.
Make a motion.
Motion by Bub. Second by Cost.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Ms. Gilks, did you mention St. Vincent de Paul when you said you were listening?
Yes, St. Vincent de Paul with St. Francis Church. That's different from St. Vincent Haven.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a request for appropriation in the amount of $6,800.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a donation that we've received from Kiwanis. It's for $6,800. It will be used at the Wells Park renovation, and this renovation couldn't be made possible without the help of a lot of people, in particular Mrs. Gilks, who's in the audience. She's been very helpful with that.
A motion by Cost.
Second.
Second by Bub. Any questions and or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a request to provide for the issuance of $1.12 million of bond anticipated notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying lot improvements, sidewalk construction, and lighting improvements and all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency.
This ordinance will allow this bond anticipation note in the amount of $1,120,000 to be renewed for 1 year. The plan is, after 1 year, to merge it in with some other bond anticipation notes and issue a long-term bond to eliminate this debt. And this, by the way, needs to be expedited.
Okay.
We'll make a motion.
Sorry. Motion by Bub, second by Cost. And questions and or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Blake.
Mr. Tronson, this isn't new debt then?
No, this was initially issued, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. We've renewed it until we can group it with some other short-term obligations.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next item on the agenda is a request for appropriation in the amount of $665 for EMS supplies.
This is an addendum to what was put in the 2018 budget. The grant award was a little higher than what we received in 2017. So.
Motion.
Motion by Bub, Second by Cost. Any questions and/or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, the Finance Committee meeting stands adjourned. Next up is Service.
All right, we'll call the Service Committee meeting to order. Those present are myself, Rath, Cost, Bub, Blake, and Lang. Up first, we will consider resolution in your packet, which is 1855, a resolution approving and ratifying an updated solid waste management plan. This resolution will be changed to 1862 as 1855, the number 18-55 has been duplicated. So we'll be changing that to 1862 in the future. But for now, the contents reads the same. And Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
Good, thank you. By title, I sit on a board of the Solid Waste District that encompasses 4 counties, CFLP, Coshocton, Licking, Fairfield, and Perry. It is a 16-member board with 4 representatives from each county, a county rep, a municipality rep, a township rep, and an at-large rep. We meet regularly, and at least every 3 years we have to update the plan. There is solid waste, some recycling, some building trash, different things like that, and they have to end up in landfills. So we work together. It is a lot of work and kind of an interesting dynamics from 4 different counties. But with that being said, this was updated a few years ago in front of this committee and approved by council. This is slated to go to the EPA upon approval of the 4 counties and the governing structures within those 4 counties, and then to be ratified in 2019. So just real quick, by law, we're required to update the management plans every 3 years. We're required to reduce solid waste that they send to the landfills, and we're obviously required to try to increase recycling. Programs are funded using disposal fees, which are collected at municipal solid waste landfills on every ton of solid waste we receive. The fees will continue to be $2 per ton for waste that's generated within our solid waste district, $4 per ton for waste that's generated outside the district but within Ohio, and $2 per ton wasted generated outside of Ohio. The generation fee will continue to be $1.25 a ton. And just so mostly what we did through meetings of some housekeeping, some adjusting, a little more emphasis on recycling. But at the end of the day, residents and businesses in the district will not see an increase in solid waste fees due to this update. So understand there isn't a financial part to that. If anyone has interest in looking at it, it's about 250 pages long. It's on a disc, and I'm happy to send it to you. But it's a lot of verbiage and just kind of based on the existing solid pan, and it just has our 3-year update. So I would ask that this council approve it. Again, there's no increased cost with it. It was just kind of a shifting a little bit, nothing major, no changes. And if nothing else, I think if it's a good time when all 4 counties kind of get together and play well. I want to say it in the phrase, in the sandbox. We have 2 counties that have disposal landfills, and we do not in Licking County have an active one, but of course we're the largest county in population of the 4, so we have a lot of refuge that goes into those, but in solid waste, but we do heavy on recycling too. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions beyond that.
Make a motion.
Motion by Bub.
Second.
Second by Lang. Any questions from the committee members? Mr. Lang.
Mayor, is there an executive summary or anything that we could look at that's...
Yeah, I can send this to you. It's just kind of a little bit of what I covered, but it's nothing heavy. And I'm happy to send you the longer one too, but either way. But sure, I'm happy to send that to council. Yep, and I'll do that between tonight and tomorrow, and you'll have that before council. 2 weeks.
Any other questions for the committee? Any questions from the audience? Thank you, Wayne. See no further questions. All those in favor of sending this on to full council signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Then I'll move on to council with a vote of 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Up next, we will consider Resolution 18-56, authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to accept bids and sell certain surplus personal property now owned by the city of Newark, Ohio, declaring that such property is no longer needed for any municipal purpose and declaring an emergency. Mr. Rhodes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On September 22nd, we're going to have an auction down at the service complex. We're going to sell some cars and some miscellaneous items. The reason for the emergency is to meet the deadlines that are legally required for selling these items.
Motion. Motion by Bub. Seconded by Cost. Any questions from the committee? Questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this out of council for a full vote, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Up next, ordinance number 18-20, consenting to the annexation of certain territory generally described as being approximately 0.53 acres, more or less, located in Newton Township to the city of Newark, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Who's to speak on this? Mr. Sassen.
Mr. Chairman, I'll speak to the next 4 items. This is becoming a fairly common thing for us. It's very similar to what we did approximately a month ago with a piece of property on Orange Hill Road. This is an expedited 2 annexation petition. Can't speak to the substance or the advisability, but I can tell you that it's a parcel of property next door to the Duke and Duchess on Mount Vernon Road near Prescott Estates. And I believe the petitioner is, I don't know technically the name, but it's Englefield Oil Company, the owner of the Duke and Duchess station. These are here tonight because we received them in time to be on the Service Committee agenda and to be reviewed and voted on tonight. But because of the deadlines imposed by the Ohio Revised Code for an expedited 2 annexation, they also have to be addressed by council tonight. So they're going to be on council's agenda tonight as a Rule 11, and I've discussed that with Mr. Marmee and Mr. Cost, who are in agreement with Rule 11 being used, because we have to act on these resolutions and have them back to the county commissioners before the end of this week.
Okay, Mr. Sassen, who owns the property being annexed?
I don't know. Oh, the petitioner, I believe, is it's.
The petitioner is the owner?
Yes. And
which is Englefield Oil?
Yes, or a subsidiary thereof.
And is there, or do we need to allot for time for neighboring objections?
We don't have that option. They have the opportunity to, if neighbors want to object, we don't have the opportunity to do that. We have to act tonight on this, because the statute basically says if we don't act in a timely fashion, and our deadline for that is July the 22nd, which would be Thursday, I believe. If we don't act by...
It's a Sunday.
Sunday, so it would be, actually our deadline then would be Friday. If we don't act by Friday, then inaction is deemed to be consent. So that's why we have both pieces of legislation here, consenting and objecting, to give council a meaningful opportunity to object, if you will. If we have just the piece of legislation consenting and council doesn't approve that, that can be viewed as inaction. Inaction, by definition of the statute, is deemed to be approval and consent to the annexation, so we have to do something this week. Neighbors who want to object would have to object tonight with us, or they can object at the next hearing with the county commissioners. And we will then receive, based on what the county commissioners do, we will then receive this back to the county commissioners for final action no less than 60 days and no more than 120 days after receiving that resolution from the county commissioners.
Neighbors been notified of the annexation?
I can't answer that. I don't know. As an expedited 2 annexation, I don't think there's a notice requirement, because as an expedited 2 annexation, all the affected property owners are petitioners to the annexation. So I don't believe there's a notice requirement as there is in a standard annexation, where everybody within 200 feet, every property within 200 feet has to be notified. That's not applicable in the case of an expedited 2 annexation.
Okay. Any other questions from anybody on the committee?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Quick follow-up for Director Sassen. So if we're invoking Rule 11 on these 4 items tonight at council, do we need to have these on the agenda tonight? I mean, isn't the purpose of Rule 11 to go directly to council without committee? I guess it feels like we're duplicating.
We are. And,
Okay.
and the only reason, and Autumn and I discussed this last week, whether it should be on service committee agenda and council. And I think we both agreed that we should put it on service committee just because seems to be more of a give and take within committee, and more of an opportunity to discuss the substance if need be in committee, and then again in council tonight if we want. So there is a bit of that duplication, but we thought better more duplication than not enough.
Fair enough. And so ordinarily, we could have just put this on. This is just an extra discussion basically at this point.
The last time this came up in June, it got onto the agenda for service committee, but it did not get in a timely fashion. So it was before committee and it was discussed, but it was not voted on because it was not presented to the clerk in a timely fashion. This one we happened to get to her last Thursday in time to get on the agenda and to be voted. So there is that duplication. Even if it wasn't on the committee tonight, Rule 11 would allow it to be heard by council.
Understood.
And I just think that Rule 11 is still necessary because we don't have the waiting period between committee and council like we would with an ordinary piece of legislation.
Makes sense.
When we first discussed having council and committee on the same evening, it was a pretty intimate discussion that we did not have anything go through committee and then straight to council on the same evening.
You have no option on this one. The Ohio Revised Code requires that you hear this by Friday. Now, you can have a special meeting one day later this week if y'all would like to come back and do it again, but otherwise we have to do something by Friday.
If I may,
Understand.
I think under the old schedule, this would have not been brought up at committee at all. This would have just been, right?
That's right,
The
because
committee
there would not
a
have
week
been a committee meeting. Under the old
It just would have been-
4 Mondays of the month, this would have still had to come up as Rule 11 because of the timing. There would not have been a committee meeting tonight as we're sitting here tonight. So there would have been no committee discussion whatsoever on this issue. So I get your point about having something at committee and at council the same night. That's the purpose of Rule 11. We're just actually adding an extra layer of discussion here by discussing it here at committee, because had we been under the old schedule, this would not have been seen in committee at all.
Okay, fair enough. And certainly wouldn't have had it an open discussion as we have today.
Correct.
Okay. Fair enough. Any other questions from the committee members? Any questions from the audience?
Is this a commercial property or?
I'm sorry, ma'am. You got to come up to the mic. You got to state your name and address, if you would, please, just for the record.
Rochelle Volan-Smith, 237 Violet Court. I was wondering whether this was a commercial property or a residential?
I can tell you that the petitioner is the owner of the Duke and Duchess station on Mount Vernon Road. The property that they're seeking to annex has what looks like a single-family home on it, but I cannot tell you how it's zoned.
Okay, and the advantage to our community in annexing this?
You'll have to ask them.
Is there an advantage to our community in annexing this?
I think the purpose of the petition is for the property to be annexed into the city, and then for the petitioner who owns the Duke and Duchess to do a lot combination, and their intention is to make that Duke and Duchess station bigger. Now, I don't know if they're going to build a new building, I don't know if they're putting in new pumps, or if they're just making the ingress and egress a little safer, because that's a very small gas station up there on Mount Vernon Road. All I can say for sure is that their goal is to annex the adjoining property and then combine the two lots. I can't tell you.
Okay, and it's not currently in the Newark jurisdiction?
The adjoining lot is not now.
So as this goes through the process, I believe, it correct me if I'm wrong, it'll go through council, and it'll also have to go to the county for their approval, and then any improvements or zoning changes that they're going to do to the property will have to come back here to the planning commission, as well as go through council again.
Okay, thank you.
Accurate?
That's correct.
Okay.
I just
Mr.
wanted
Mayor?
to clarify, it's the Duke and Duchess further north. Right, it isn't that Dio Drive, it's the other one.
It's the one at
up
North
farther
Vernon
up.
Road. North Vernon Road.
Yes, just to be clear.
Very small.
closer to the edge of our unincorporated area. So-
Very small country-style gas station.
Right, and it has people, and they are intending to enlarge it, so what could our benefit be? Potentially more employment, people would hire a few more people being a larger place, and things like that, so.
And a more aesthetically pleasing
And
service station at the entrance of
And safer.
north entrance. Okay. Any other questions? William, is it pertinent to the topic at hand?
Yeah.
You're not coming up to give me a weather report, are you?
Okay. I think the Duke and Duchess.
William?
Oh,
You know the routine.
the top of 10 weather forecast.
No. Name and address, please.
Win Butcher, 263 Union Street.
No weather.
Okay, Win Butcher, 263 Union Street. The Duke and Duchess on Mount Vernon Road is Duke and Duchess is on Mount Vernon Road. So it's between Newton and Newark. I think you go ahead, access Duke and Duchess to Newark. You got my permission. And when I say, well, look at that, Duke and Duchess should access Newark. And that's why I say, if you want to, go ahead and put that on the Newark City Council meeting tonight or a committee meeting.
All right. Thank you.
That pass.
Thank you. Any other questions or permissions granted? All right, so seeing no other questions, do I have a motion on this?
Motion.
Motion by Lang,
Second.
seconded by Bub.
That was on 1820.
That was on 1820. Should I reread this? No? Okay. Any further questions before we vote? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to council signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. 1820 will move on this evening with a count of vote of 5-0. 1821, an ordinance objecting to the annexation in certain territory generally described as being 0.53 acres, more or less, located in Newton Township to the city of Newark, Ohio, and declare an emergency. Mr. Sassen, briefly.
Just again, this is the counterpoint to 18-20. I'd ask that you pass them both on to council so that full council can have an opportunity to object or consent as deemed appropriate.
I apologize for that.
Obviously, once it gets to council, you can't vote yes on both, but you can here in committee.
Okay. Questions on 21 and procedure?
Make a motion.
Motion by Lang.
Second.
Seconded by Bub. Questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That will pass on to full council with a vote of 5-0. Up next, 1859. Oh, I'm just reading here. A resolution adopting a statement indicating what services, if any, the city of Newark, Ohio will provide for approximately 0.53 acres, more or less located in the Newton Township, a territory proposed for expedited 2 annexation, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Johnson.
To borrow a phrase from yourself, Mr. Chairman, ditto.
Ditto. Any questions?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Bub. Seconded by Cost. All those in favor of sending this on to full council signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That will be passed on to council with a vote of 5-0. Resolution number 1860, a resolution regarding a buffer zone for the annexation of approximately 0.53 acres, more or less, located in Newton Township to the city of Newark and declaring an emergency. Mr. Sassen?
Once again, any questions?
Ditto.
All part of the same project.
Ditto. Okay.
Motion.
Motion by Bub,
Second.
seconded by Lang. Any questions from the committee? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to council signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That'll be passed on to council with a vote of 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Sassen. And that concludes Service Committee. Up next will be Safety Committee.
All right, I would like to call this meeting of the Newark City Safety Committee to order. Present are myself, Mr. Fennell, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Rath, and Mr. Blake. This evening, for consideration, we have ordinance number 18-22, amending Chapter 1870 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Newark, Ohio, relative to electronic smoking devices within the municipal corporation. Mr. Lang, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, happy to. So this came about as a result of a conversation I had with Director Baum and subsequent conversations with Director Sasson. I had a complaint from one of my constituent businesses that, or business located in my ward, that they're having issues with folks using electronic cigarettes out in front of their store. When the door opens, that gets sucked right in. It was driving off customers. Had some discussions with Director Baum, and I apologize. He was ill this afternoon, wasn't able to make it, was going to speak to this as well. Long story short, we came to the conclusion, we realized that we don't currently have anything on the books that prevents you from standing right outside of a retail establishment. We actually don't have anything on the books to prevent you from vaping in council chambers or city property, and so we felt it was appropriate to go ahead and align our laws to address the electronic smoke or vaping, whatever. I forget how we define it in the statute there.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the administration in support of this? Is that what?
Director Baum's in full support, and like I said, I apologize. I think he texted Dave this afternoon. He came down with some illness.
And then, when it comes to an overview of where can you smoke, where can't you smoke, can you just do a high level for them?
Yeah, so it's meant to mirror essentially how our smoking laws are set up, which some of it is preempted by the state laws, which prevent you from smoking in bars and liquor establishments. But it's meant to mirror that statute. So city-owned property, and then outside of public areas, basically you have to be far enough away so that what you're vaping, the aerosol that you're giving off isn't going into the entrance of that facility.
Any other questions?
Oh, lots.
Can I entertain a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Frazier with the first?
I'll second the motion, but I want to ask a question.
Okay. Mr. Rath with a second. Mr. Rath.
So other than seeing people walking down the street doing it or wherever we're seeing it doing it, I am old and unfamiliar with vaping. So is this only used for, in a legal sense, paraphrase that, used for tobacco or nicotine tobacco products?
So
or are there vaping machines that they could do that have nothing to do with tobacco or nicotine?
So you can put different types of solutions in them. Some of them actually don't have nicotine, but the same device that you can use to smoke one that has nicotine, you can put a cartridge in, or you can put solution in there that has cannabis or no nicotine at all. So it can be used in a variety.
Well, it said legal, so I'm not talking about peanut.
Sure. It can be used in legal and illegal ways if you put a different solution in it.
But I'm saying is, can they be used for non-tobacco, non-cannabis
yes,
uses?
They can be.
So what grounds would we have to legalize those?
Well, you can't tell the difference, right? So unless you went out and tested what they had, you can't tell the difference.
Are other communities adopting laws such as this?
I believe so. Yes, there are a number of bans in various cities throughout the states, and some states have as well. And so I wouldn't expect it to be too long before the state of Ohio might even adopt something similar, or take our tobacco law and expand it into electronic cigarettes.
Could I continue on?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chastain.
Just as a follow-up to your last question,
Yes, sir.
I didn't really write this from a blank piece of paper. I did review a number of other cities, and the closest one that I found that has an outright ban on vaping anywhere in its city limits is similar to this. I'm sorry, not anywhere in the city limits, but similar to our ordinances, is Bexley. So a lot of the language that you see in here is very, very similar to what you see in the Bexley ordinance.
Legal plagiarism, I love it. So
We call it research.
I tried that with my teachers too, they didn't like it.
Mr. Adler.
So in your initial description, you discussed bars, and you had two terms. Bars and liquor establishments, is that what you call it?
Well, the state,
So our smoking ban is for all businesses. Does this mirror that as well?
yeah, so we basically just adjusted our current smoking legislation. There was an adjustment, and I would invite the health director to speak to this as well, and he could offer some additional input. But the way it's written is basically to expand our current smoking bans to cover electronic devices as well.
So basically, anywhere you're not allowed to smoke, you're not allowed to vape.
That's the intent.
Okay. You spoke specifically of bars and liquor establishments. I thought that was
Because we originally had, if you look, we were removing two sections. We originally had exceptions for bars, I think it's 87003 G and H, that we originally had those exceptions from our smoking ban, but then that was preempted by state law, which then, preempted what we had done. And so at this point, we're removing those sections since they're no longer applicable for smoking. We figured it would make sense to take those exceptions out since they've been preempted.
Mr. Chairman? Yes. Again, to follow up on that answer, section G and H that you see on the last page of the ordinance, or the second to last page of the ordinance, really need to be taken out whether you approve of a vaping ban or not, because this is the old leftover from the smoking ordinance that we passed before the state passed its wider ban. So really, regardless of how you feel about the vaping changes, and even if this goes nowhere, at some point in time we'll probably come back and ask you to take sections G and H out of 1870.03 so that we're in conformity with state law.
fair enough. Mr. Rhodes had something he wanted to say.
No, he was just reminding me that Mr. Ebel was here from the health department.
Well, let's hear from him.
Yeah.
All right. Will you state your name and residence, please?
Good evening. I'm Joe Ebel, the Licking County Health Commissioner for your health department. And I appreciate Councilman Lang proposing this legislation. Obviously, our smoking ban in Ohio passed before e-cigarettes were really a thing, so it wasn't included at the time. And really, they should update the state law, but I think the fear is because it is a state law that once you open up the legislator to say, let's start making amendments to something, you never know what you're going to end up with. So I think that's why they've been reluctant to move forward on that. But I think the idea of treating, e-cigarettes the same as regular cigarettes, updating the ordinance so that they just mirror each other, it should avoid confusion. I've been in some restaurants locally and seen people sitting at a table and vaping, and it's kind of like, what's going on there? Do you allow it in here? A lot of places just don't have a policy that says, yeah, we do, or no, we don't. So it's kind of catches them by surprise. So I think because the health effects for the person using the vape device and the tobacco are somewhat similar, that they're really nicotine delivery systems. We know what the risks with tobacco smoke are. We don't really know all the risks with vaping because the solutions you put into them are currently unregulated. So, to ask what's in them, you just have no idea. So while the FDA is working through that to hopefully, provide some better regulation, at this point we do, know that it is not healthy. And if you choose to do it, that's fine, but you shouldn't be doing it in a place where other people are exposed to it, involuntarily. So just ask you for your support.
Mr. Frazier.
So, in the preliminary research for vaporizing, is there any link to carcinogens, or is even that still being researched and we don't know if it causes cancer or the health ramifications of vaporizing?
I think the preliminary results were that it was a little bit better. If you're going to smoke cigarettes, it's a little bit better to use vaping, but it's also much better to not use either one. Was kind of the results. We know a lot of them have ethylene glycol in them. And also because of the high temperatures with the heating element in there, the chemicals that are in it aren't necessarily the same chemicals that come out, once you heat it up and it vaporizes.
Mr. Rath.
It sounds like you don't have an answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyways. What are the health risks, but I'm going to say this, what are the health risks of secondhand vaping?
I brought Chris Saylor, who's our tobacco prevention specialist, and he's doing a lot with the vaping campaigns with trying to keep it out of the schools, so he might have an answer to that.
Chris Saylor, health educator at the Licking County Health Department. To answer your question, I would compare it similar to that of secondhand smoke exposure with traditional cigarettes and traditional tobacco products. That any exposure to them, anything that you breathe in your lungs that's not clean air is not good for your body. So in a similar fashion that it could affect it in the same manner, but we don't know the exact results of the health risks of exactly what it does, just because it's so new to the market and there's just not quite enough research there yet. Sorry if that didn't answer your question completely.
Mr. Frazier.
When it comes perfectly, you don't know.
Do we know what the output is? Is it aerosol? Is it what is the output from e-cigarettes? Do we know what that substance is?
Entirely no. A lot of people think that it's just a water vapor. That's not true, because we do know that there are chemicals in the solution. It is more similar of an aerosol, such as like any type of cleaning product. Not that it has the same
chemical
effects.
Composition.
Yes, but similar in that fashion that it's not water vapor, but there are chemicals. It's more of an aerosol than a traditional smoke, because there's no organic matter being burned.
And then I imagine that you endorse this legislation as well as the health educator professional for
I would, yeah.
the health department.
All right. Any other questions, Mr. Blake?
Mr. Chairman, I hope the law director might be able to answer a question for me. If we have a current business which was having an issue with people coming to their establishment vaping or using e-cigarettes, does that business can they tell their customers to stop doing that now? I mean, what stops them from not telling their customers to doing this currently?
Nothing. They have the right to ask that there be no vaping, just as back in the day a restaurant could ask that there be no smoking. So there's nothing that stops them from doing it.
Mr. Chair? The one difference there would be mostly in the downtown area where the sidewalk becomes public property. So, if the property owner wouldn't have any authority to tell somebody they can't stand on the sidewalk, where now with this being a city ordinance, the health department would be able to say, no, you can't stand by this opening of the door or whatever. So in those cases, if you have a large private property where you can control the entrance, it's a little different.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Any questions from the audience?
There's already establishments that have the signs up that say, including e-cigs, like the Trout Club, they already have it up there, they have signs up there. They don't allow it at their facility, and they're within the rights to do that within their facility.
All right. Any other questions or discussions from the committee? Mr. Blake.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know who to answer this, but what's the punishments if someone were to do so and not stop?
I'd have to look it up. If you email me tomorrow, I'll let you know. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's in 1870.99 would be my guess, but I don't have that in front of me.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Mr. Sasson, is it parallel to that of smoking?
The penalty?
Yes.
Oh, it'd be identical, yeah. I just don't know what that is. It'd be the same penalty as smoking.
That's all.
Mr. Marmee, you could step to the podium.
On that same note, who enforces this? Okay, and how?
Well, it would probably be the same way that, because it was the city ordinance for that year before the statewide ban, it would be the same circumstance. So generally, it's a warning, and then on most of them, it's after a warning. At some point, there's a fine that would apply. So in our cases, it would be providing signage. Like right now, every business in Ohio has to have the sign that says no smoking. So we could probably print up new signs that would include in Newark that could include e-cigarettes on it, and just have them switch out those signs, and that would probably be the biggest education piece that we would need to do.
And the biggest question is, like the example you just gave, out on a public sidewalk, how do you enforce that? And what's the measurement? Or how does it determine whether they're in violation of our...
Yeah, I guess if it would become an issue, the way that the rules read, even the state rules, as far as how close you can be to the door, in some states it's 20 feet, in Ohio they don't have that. So in theory, if the wind's always blowing, away from the door, you could stand right by it or something. So it becomes a judgment call. And if it was something where they had a chronic problem, we would go out and talk to the people that are there. And if they refuse to move, we'd have to then, contact the police department to come out and try to help us, support or enforce that code. If it was on private property, they could just, if they didn't leave, then they would have to say, well, you're trespassing.
Any other questions or discussions from the committee? Questions or discussions from the audience? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor of sending this on to full council, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. That passes 5-0. And with that concludes this safety committee meeting. Council will start in 30 minutes.